Where did all the good games go? There's no new games. Games just aren't as good as they were back in the day. If you're a consumer of video game and tech media like myself, you've probably seen these sentiments all over the place. From people making YouTube videos, articles being written about it, posts on Twitter, people maybe streaming on Twitch talking about it. I think a lot of this is an echo chamber, but with the rise in social media, these echo chambers are growing. And what happens is, as these articles and videos get out, more and more people see them and start to believe it and jump on board. I don't necessarily believe it myself, but that's what I want to talk about today. Why is there this growing thought that video games, at least good ones, are gone? There's no good games in 2024. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for coming back for Nerd Cave Chat episode 4. If you've seen the last ones, awesome. If not, go check them out. I've had some fun topics on gaming and tech, and I'm hoping to keep this series going. With that said, I want to get straight into it. Now, straight up, if you ask me, I think it's the best time ever to be a gamer. There's more ways to play, there's more games to play, there's more choice, and there's a lot of really good games out there. But why then are people saying there isn't? Why is there this sentiment that gaming has gotten so much worse over the last couple of years? And let's look into that. But I want to start out with kind of looking at the last decade and hitting on 5 major points that I think honestly were pretty good, or at least, growth for gaming in the last decade. First off, we have the technical leaps. We've had the 8th and 9th generation of main consoles, PS4 to PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series, Wii U, not the greatest thing, but that was followed up by the Nintendo Switch. And we've had 5 generations of graphics cards and 8 generations of CPU launches come out in that last decade. All of this leads to an increase in performance and efficiency when playing video games, and it allows developers to really go hard and make some awesome games for us. Point number 2, online connection. Think back to even 2013, 2014, right when the Xbox One was coming out and the PS4 were coming out, about how your internet was then compared to how it is now. Think about online lobbies. Think about PC gamers too, the options you had for online competitive games compared to what you have now, and even online casual games, which we had a lot less of back then. Point 3, the Nintendo Switch launched in 2017, which in itself is just go along with the console upgrade cycle thing, but what it gave us a look into was the window into what AAA gaming could be if it was put on a handheld. And it wasn't the greatest then, but it led to now what is the Steam Deck and other PC handhelds starting to pave the way for a future of handheld AAA gaming. Point 4, we have indie devs. And it was indie devs getting their games out there in 2013, 2014 compared to now. There was a lot less choice for them for getting their games out there and a lot less choice for gamers to choose from. It wasn't as easy for them to develop. Now we have thousands upon thousands of games just coming into Steam Next Fest every year for us to try demos out on, as well as games dropping on the Switch eShop, the Xbox, PlayStation, everywhere. We can play indie games. They're right at our fingertips. You can just kind of go try them out. You don't have to wait for these big game companies or articles or anything like that for stuff to launch. It's right at our fingertips. And then the last point I want to make, point 5, gaming has finally been acknowledged as one of the biggest things in media and entertainment. Investors see this, advertisers see this, and because of that, there have been huge investments in gaming, allowing these companies to grow and put out some absolute spectacles of games. When you think of The Last of Us, Spider-Man, God of War, Gears of War, all that stuff is groundbreaking, next level type stuff that we've gotten over the last decade. So you might think, hey, those are some great points. I've proved my point. So what's this whole thing about? Why are people complaining? Why are people saying there's no games? Well, how about we look at the 5 points in a little bit different light? And this is why I kind of picked those specific 5 points. Not all 5 of them, but I think that they can be looked at differently. So let's go back to the first point, and it was the technical leaps we've had. And yeah, we've had technical leaps, but we've also seen diminishing returns. Since the PS4 and Xbox One have launched, we've been getting ever closer to it being harder to see the difference in graphical leaps in video games. We're approaching that realism type thing. I think the toughest part for companies is going to be getting through that uncanny valley when it comes to how movement works. But besides that, like you look at especially car games, racing games, and some of that can be almost photorealistic. It's crazy. So people are questioning, why do I need to upgrade? You know, unless you're a real nerd like me and many others online, you don't see the benefits right away when you hear solid state drive or you hear 120 frames per second. You don't necessarily care. If your game loads and plays at 60 FPS, even 30 FPS, and you're having a good time, why upgrade? All right, the second point was online. And yeah, sure, online's gotten better. But what it's led to is DRM. We have always online single player games. We have consoles that won't even work until they connect to the internet. You have to constantly be checking your connection to see if you have a license for a game. And gaming companies are just finding ways to like tie you down more and more if you don't have that internet connection and you're not always checking back in with them. A lot of games don't even work at all if the servers go down. And that's such a disappointment. You think you paid $70 for this thing and it flops and you only have it for maybe 3, 4, 5 months. In the case of Concord, 2 weeks. And there were a handful of people that liked that game and it's just gone. Sure, they got refunds, but like that's the future. You think about 10, 15, 20 years ago, that couldn't happen. And now it happens all the time. So 3, this was the one that I said maybe is a little tougher to look at, but there is a couple things to look at here. And that's the whole like handheld thing. I think it's pretty great, but it's still in its infancy. And one of the things we're seeing with that is poor battery life, poor efficiency, still having, you know, not the best performance when it comes to the games. We're getting close on all these fronts. And believe me, I love it. But I still think we have a couple years to go until this is perfected. I don't think it's a negative. I'm just pointing out that there could be like questionable flaws with it currently. Number 4 was talking about how it's easier than ever for small games, indie developers to get their games made, to get noticed, to get out there, and for gamers to have all of this at their fingertips. But it's also gotten easier for the companies that are just putting out absolute crap, bloatware. You know, you go to the Switch eShop and probably get 60% of the stuff that shows up on the home screen is like a $2 to $5 game that is just absolute crap. People putting out the bare minimum, trying to make a few dollars. You go to Steam and you have crypto games you have to sift through sometimes when looking for some of this indie stuff. Things that'll do crypto mining in the background while you try to run the game. You get it going, you realize it's just some auto battler that you don't even do anything. It's just there to use your computer's hardware. And then the last point, 5. And this one is by far the biggest point. I think it's by far the most polarizing point. And what I said is video games have finally been noticed, acknowledged as the biggest form of media on the planet. We have huge investors coming in, investing publicly in these massive traded companies like Microsoft. We've got Sony, we've got Ubisoft, we've got Square Enix, we've got the parent company of THQ. I can't even think of the name straight off my head right now. And there's so many more out there that are publicly traded, even, you know, like Nintendo. And with that, especially here in the Western markets, you've seen that it's led to games being, it's almost like a game mill. Games are being like rushed out, pushed out, developed for the largest demographic, not developed for the original fan base they might have had back in the day. And it's really hurting gamers and these large game companies. We've had record layoffs in the last year and a half, 2 years, and they don't seem to be slowing down. They don't seem to be stopping. And these companies don't seem to get the picture, or they don't really have a choice because they have their leads or these investors who are saying, hey, let's grab that IP. It's honestly like what happened with Star Wars and Disney. At least for me, Star Wars is a shell of what it used to be. And it feels like Disney just bought it up to milk it dry. And it feels like that's the same thing that are happening with so many beloved developers. Are these huge companies are buying them up to milk them dry of their IP, and they're not actually putting out quality work. They're just throwing things out there. Now what? Now you're thinking, well, it is all doom and gloom. I don't necessarily think so. I still agree with my original point of I think gaming is in the best place it's ever been. I think the talking point with that is we just have to understand that things change. With growth is going to come backpedaling. With every 2 steps forward, there's going to be 1 step back. And it's a learning process, a growing process. Yeah, we're going to have a lot of these companies that we maybe loved 20 years ago, 10 years ago, start to fail. They maybe don't have the same developers there anymore. They're maybe not under the same leadership or company. And they have completely different leadership at the high up investment level, telling them what to do. But in their place, we have so many other companies that have stepped up and stepped in. Just think about it. We have long-running franchises that are doing better than ever, coming from companies that were a little bit smaller, that have grown now, like FromSoft. We have things like Baldur's Gate 3 coming from an indie developer in Larian. And yeah, they are an independent developer. They just had a lot of money from passionate private investors, which is different than a publicly traded company that has to answer to a ton of investment. They answered to people who were passionate, who wanted to invest in the best game they could make. And we saw what happened. Game of the year last year. The issue here, and I think it's everywhere, but it's definitely worse in the West, is there's this notion with the investment in gaming over the last 5 years. It's like chasing being the next Fortnite. And I know that's been said a lot, but that's where I want these investors and these big companies to figure it out. You know what I mean? Just like step back, take a look at what you have. You're probably sitting on a gold mine, and you're just trying to take advantage of it instead of let it nurture and grow. Look at the East. We have companies like mentioned earlier in FromSoft. We also have Capcom and Sega, Nintendo, and tons more that are all doing better than ever over there. And it's because they're just doing what they've always done, but trying to reach new heights while doing it. Even Square Enix is putting out banger after banger. So many games, honestly, too many games. That might be one of their issues. I also think that leadership maybe needs to look at their predictions, what they're estimating for sales, because game after game, they keep saying they're not meeting their sales quotas. But they're selling great. They're making great games. Part of it, like I said, is they're just putting out too many good games. There's not enough time for the people who love those styles of games, those RPGs, to play all of them. So you are going to have ones that fail just out of the fact that people can't play everything. But like I said, you've got Sega. They're putting out games like Persona, Yakuza, even new Sonic games that are doing great. Persona and Yakuza, they just celebrated each franchise passing 20 million sold, which is huge for both smaller franchises that have grown to now household franchise names. We've got Capcom, who put out Dragon's Dogma 2 earlier this year. They've been killing it with all of their Monster Hunter games, Street Fighter, and Resident Evil. All of these are huge franchises now. Resident Evil 9 was just leaked. People are super excited for that. We've got From Software that can't stop winning. Every release is a win for them. They've got other companies copying them. Their games have created a whole new genre of Soulsborne games. You had Elden's Ring DLC this year, which will probably be a Game of the Year contender. A DLC being a Game of the Year contender is just crazy. And then we got Nintendo, who just keeps doing their thing. They do their thing in a weird way a lot of times, and they don't always listen to, I think, fans and critics. But that's how we get the good and the bad. We get the bad, the unfortunate, like the Wii U, and then we get the good, like the Nintendo Switch, and their games are always consistently Nintendo. And anyone who's a Nintendo fan knows what that means. To list a few others, we had Nihon Falcom, Level 5, Vanillaware, Gust, and even Konami, all releasing a ton of games this year. And we've had companies now coming up in China. They started with things like Genshin Impact and Tower of Fantasy a couple years ago, getting into that kind of gotcha MMO market with mobile games and PC games. But now it's led to something like Black Myth Wukong, or even Still Wakes the Deep for some more niche people out there, coming out this year to great reception, especially amongst gamers. I really haven't even gotten to talk about any specific indie games. I could talk more about Baldur's Gate 3, considering that was an indie. I absolutely love Sea of Stars. I played that a ton this year. I'm looking forward to playing Chained Echoes, which I know came out a year and a half ago. And there's so many out there. You got things like Stardew Valley, that's been around for almost a decade now, waiting for their next game in Haunted Chocolatier. Something that my fiance and I played and loved, and it was such a cute little game, Unboxed, which is just a cute little, had great music, a little bit of story you could follow, and you're just placing things around rooms. So I could go on about indie games, honestly, for hours and not run out of good games to talk about. What I'm getting at with this is everything in life is going to come with positives and negatives. Things are going to change. People are going to get old. They're going to look at things with their rosy nostalgia glasses and remember better times when they had less responsibilities and games felt better because you didn't have other things to make you worry when you were trying to sit down and relax with a game. Maybe you don't have to worry about that. You have these positive memories of these brand new experiences you had as a kid, and the new stuff just isn't matching up for you. But maybe that's you that's changed a little bit too. I know me personally, my gaming tastes have changed so much. I used to be hardcore into fighters, into multiplayer games, shooters, all that stuff. And in the last couple of years, I've gotten really into single-player RPG style games, like JRPGs specifically, but even the big Sony games, which like 2-3 years ago, I was complaining that every Sony game looked alike. It's just cinematic, third-person over-the-shoulder camera, with some puzzling, some combat, some sneaking around, good story, woo, game over. Same thing. And then I actually started playing them and realized I was just boohooing because I never had a PS4. And then they started to come to PC. Then I got a PS5. Turns out those games are great. And I should have just given them a chance from the start. So when you get upset and you start to think, hey, games just aren't good anymore, they're not what they used to be, big game companies are just ruining all these old IPs, yeah, some of that's probably true. But also, just look a little ways over one way or the other, and you're gonna find there's more games, more good games than ever before. And try them out. You might find something you love. You might have an experience like when you were a little kid and you had that best ever gaming experience. You might have it again. Honestly, I've been having it with Metaphor ReFantazio. I'm excited to play that a little bit after this tonight, and I think I'm going to call that here. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.